Welcome to another deep dive. You all have given us quite a challenge this time.
Yeah.
A bunch of excerpts from Vladimir Safatle's Maneras de Transformar Mundos.
Yeah, it's
I have to admit, I needed my Portuguese dictionary for that title. But the real head scratcher is how he connects psychoanalysis and politics.
right.
So we're here to help you get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there.
So,
So Safatle really uses the ideas of Jacques Lacan,
yeah,
who's kind of a major figure in psychoanalysis,
right.
to take a fresh look at political ideas,
Okay.
like, emancipation, social change. And it's not just like a surface level application.
Right.
He really digs deep into Lacan's work to see how it can change our understanding of politics.
And from what I've seen in these excerpts, he focuses on four key concepts: identification, enjoyment, or jouissance in Lacan's terms,
Yes.
transference, and the act.
Right.
Now, I'm no psychoanalyst,
Yeah.
but those sound pretty intense.
They are, but they're also surprisingly relevant
Okay.
to how we experience the world and how we relate to power.
Mm-hmm.
What's fascinating is that Lacan didn't see these as just theoretical ideas.
Right.
They're deeply woven into our daily lives, even if we're not aware of them.
Okay, so let's start with identification.
Okay.
I think most people would assume that means copying someone you admire,
Yeah.
like a role model.
Right, like a role model.
But Lacan seems to have a different take on it, right?
He does, yeah. For Lacan, identification goes much deeper than imitation.
Okay.
It's about internalizing all those unspoken rules and expectations that surround us from the moment we're born.
Yeah.
So think about language, social roles, cultural norms. We absorb all of that, and it becomes part of who we are.
Right.
It shapes our desires, our sense of self, even how we see our place in the world.
So it's more like these external forces are actually shaping our internal world, our very identity.
Exactly. And here's where Lacan makes a connection to politics that I find really thought-provoking.
Okay.
He argues that the decline of the traditional patriarchal family, what he calls the decline of the paternal imago, has had a huge impact on how we identify with authority.
Okay. I can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Less father knows best, more questioning of authority in general.
Right. And Lacan suggests that this shift can create a kind of void, a longing for strong figures to fill that role.
Right.
He even links this to the rise of
Interesting.
authoritarian personalities. So think about leaders who project an image of absolute authority.
Yeah.
It's almost as if people are unconsciously seeking to replace that lost paternal figure.
Wow. That's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is, yeah.
So if our early experiences shape how we relate to power and authority, what happens when those foundations are shaky?
Well, that's a question Safatle really grapples with, and
Yeah.
it leads us to the next concept, jouissance.
Okay, now that's a word I've always found a bit mysterious. Beyond the obvious implications. It's not just simple pleasure, right? It's something more intense.
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to translate directly.
Yeah.
Think of jouissance as a kind of excessive enjoyment, a satisfaction that goes beyond the everyday.
Okay.
And this is where Safatle's argument gets really interesting.
Okay.
He suggests that capitalism has actually reshaped our very modes of jouissance.
Hold on. Capitalism is messing with our enjoyment.
In a way, yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, consider how capitalism encourages us to find satisfaction through consuming, buying things, constantly striving for more.
Yeah.
It creates this cycle of desire and dissatisfaction where we're always chasing after the next thing
Right.
that will supposedly bring us jouissance.
Yeah.
And it often ties our enjoyment to things like status, competition, and material possessions.
So we're looking for fulfillment in all the wrong places, basically.
You could say that, yeah.
And I'm guessing that doesn't exactly encourage us to think critically about the system itself.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
And Lacan adds another layer of complexity here.
Okay.
He coined the term phallic jouissance.
Okay, now you're really piquing my curiosity. Phallic jouissance. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Essentially, Lacan is arguing that this dominant form of enjoyment is structured in a way that reinforces traditional gender roles and power dynamics.
Okay.
It's about striving for a certain kind of power and control, often associated with masculinity.
Right.
And it ties back to the whole idea of identification, how we internalize these societal norms and then seek jouissance in ways that perpetuate them.
Wow. So we're talking about psychology, economics, gender dynamics, and politics all rolled into one concept.
All connected.
This jouissance thing is pretty powerful stuff.
It is.
And it raises some crucial questions.
Yeah.
If our very modes of enjoyment are shaped by these systems, what does that mean for our capacity to imagine and create a different kind of world, one that's not driven by this potentially destructive form of jouissance?
Good questions, yeah.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all of this connects to social change, and it sounds like it's going to get pretty radical.
It does.
But before we go down that rabbit hole, we have to tackle transference.
Okay.
I always associate that with therapy.
Right.
So I'm curious to hear how it relates to politics.
Well, that's the brilliance of Lacan.
Yeah.
He recognized that transference operates in all sorts of power dynamics.
Okay.
Not just between like a therapist and a patient.
Right.
It's about unconsciously transferring feelings and expectations onto figures of authority.
Okay.
We see this all the time in politics.
Yes.
Think about how people project certain qualities onto leaders.
Yeah.
Investing them with almost mythical powers.
Yeah, like the cult of personality phenomenon.
Exactly.
Where a leader becomes more of a symbol than an actual person.
Exactly. And it can work in much more subtle ways, too. Transference can actually perpetuate existing power structures because it often makes us blind to the ways those structures are serving the interests of the powerful. We end up unconsciously supporting systems that might be working against our own best interests.
So we're transferring our hope spheres, maybe even our unresolved childhood issues,
Right.
onto these political figures and institutions, and that can cloud our judgment.
It's a real risk.
Yeah.
But Lacan also saw a potential for subversion within transference.
Okay.
He believed that if we understand how it works,
Right.
we can start to challenge those unconscious patterns. He even talked about the importance of the liquidation of transference.
Liquidation. That sounds intense.
It does.
Is he talking about getting rid of transference entirely?
It's a complex idea and one that Lacan didn't fully develop,
Okay.
but it suggests that it's possible to create institutions that are designed to account for and manage the effects of transference rather than being unconsciously driven by it.
So institutions that are self-aware about the psychology of power.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see why Safatle finds Lacan so relevant to political transformation.
Yeah.
But how do we even begin to design institutions like that? What would they look like?
Well, that's a question that requires a lot more exploration.
Yeah.
But I think Lacan gives us a framework for starting to think about it.
Okay.
He encourages us to question our assumptions about power and to consider how unconscious dynamics might be shaping our political systems.
Oh.
And that leads us to the final concept, the act.
Oh, okay. Bring on the revolution.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling Lacan's idea of the act is going to be a bit different from what we usually think of as political action.
You're right about that. For Lacan, a true act isn't just about making a conscious decision or exercising free will in the way we typically understand it.
So it's not about voting for a different candidate or signing a petition?
They might be,
Okay.
but not necessarily.
Oh,
What Lacan is getting at is that a true act is something much more disruptive, unsettling.
All right. I'm definitely intrigued.
Okay.
Give me more.
Well, Lacan saw the act as something that has the potential to create profound personal and social transformation.
Okay.
It's not just about changing who's in power,
Right.
but about transforming the very foundations of how we think and how we organize our societies.
So changing the game, not just the players.
Exactly.
I like it.
Yeah.
But I'm still a bit fuzzy on what a Lacanian act would actually look like in practice.
Right.
Can you give me some examples?
That's where things get tricky.
Yeah.
Lacan was deliberately vague about specific examples.
Okay.
Because he believed that the act emerges from a very particular subjective encounter with what he called the real.
Okay.
It's not something you can just plan or predict.
Right.
But Safatle does connect Lacan's idea of the act to a poem by Arthur Rimbaud called Une raison, which translates to a reason.
A poem.
Yeah.
All right, now we're really getting deep into the abstract.
A little bit.
How does a poem illustrate a political act?
Well, the poem itself is pretty complex, but there's a specific image that Lacan focuses on.
Okay.
A drum beat that releases all sounds, symbolizing the creation of a new harmony.
Okay, I can kind of see where he's going with this.
Yeah.
Is he saying that a true act can shatter old patterns and create something completely new?
Exactly. And this is where Lacan's ideas about revolution start to get really interesting.
Okay.
He was deeply skeptical of traditional Marxist notions of revolution,
Okay.
particularly the idea of the proletariat as the inevitable agent of historical change.
Wait, Lacan didn't believe in the power of the working class to overthrow capitalism?
Yeah, he had some issues with that idea.
That seems like a pretty controversial stance even for a psychoanalyst.
It was, and it definitely made him a bit of an outsider even among leftists.
Yeah.
Lacan saw the proletariat as potentially trapped within the same symbolic order
Okay.
that they were trying to overthrow.
Okay.
He argued that they were still seeking a master figure,
Right.
someone to lead them to a promised land of freedom and equality.
So he's saying that even revolutions can end up just replicating the same power dynamics.
That's his concern.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
And it's why his concept of the act becomes so crucial.
Right.
If revolution isn't simply about transferring power from one group to another, what does it mean to truly break free from those existing structures?
Right.
What would a genuinely new social order look like, and how do we get there?
Big questions.
All right, my mind is officially blown.
That's good.
We've gone from identification and jouissance to transference and revolutionary acts.
All connected.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more.
How do all of these ideas fit together? And what can we actually do with them?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's one that Safatle spends the whole book exploring.
Yeah, okay.
But I think one of the key takeaways is that understanding these Lacanian concepts can help us move beyond simplistic notions of power and individual agency.
So we're not just rational actors making choices based on our own self-interest?
Not entirely.
Okay.
Lacan forces us to acknowledge the powerful role that the unconscious plays in shaping our desires, our actions, and even our political beliefs.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all of this comes together.
Yeah.
But how do we actually start to unpack all of this unconscious stuff? It's not like we can just peer into our own minds and see what's lurking down there.
That's where things get a bit tricky.
Yeah.
And it's where psychoanalysis as a practice and a way of thinking can be so valuable.
Okay.
It provides us with tools for exploring the depths of the unconscious, for understanding those symbolic structures that shape our experience.
Okay.
And potentially for disrupting those structures and creating new ways of being in the world.
Wow. It sounds like a pretty radical form of self-awareness.
It is.
And I'm guessing it has some pretty major implications for how we engage with politics and social change.
Yeah, definitely.
But before we dive into all of that, let's take a quick break. And we'll come back and explore these ideas even further.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've been diving deep into some pretty intense Lacanian concepts.
Yeah.
With identification, enjoyment, transference, and the act.
A lot to unpack there.
But how does all of this actually play out in our lives?
Well, let's think about how these ideas might apply to something like, say, political advertising.
Okay.
Have you ever noticed how some campaigns try to tap into those deep-seated longings for a strong leader?
Oh, absolutely. They use imagery and language that evoke a sense of security, stability, even paternal authority.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to trigger those unconscious desires that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. They're playing on those unconscious identifications that we form early in life. And they're often appealing to a particular form of jouissance, one that's tied to feeling protected, having a sense of belonging, or maybe even experiencing a kind of vicarious power through the leader.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So those ads aren't just trying to persuade us on a rational level.
Right.
They're trying to tap into something much deeper, more primal.
Exactly. And this is where understanding transference can be so eye-opening.
Okay.
We might think we're making rational choices about who to vote for.
Right.
But those choices are often influenced by unconscious projections and expectations that we're transferring onto those political figures.
You know, thinking about transference, like, that makes me realize how often I've projected my own hopes and fears onto political leaders. It's like I was looking for a savior instead of critically evaluating their policies.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of becoming more aware of those unconscious dynamics.
Right.
If we can start to recognize when we're transferring our own unmet needs or unresolved conflicts onto others, we can start to make more conscious and informed choices.
So how do we actually start to break free from those unconscious patterns?
That's the big question.
Especially when it comes to something as complex and deeply rooted as politics.
Well, I think that's where Lacan's idea of the act comes in.
Okay.
It's not about simply becoming more rational or trying to suppress our unconscious desires.
Okay.
It's about finding ways to disrupt those symbolic structures that limit our thinking and behavior.
Okay, I'm still struggling to grasp what that would look like in a real-world political context.
Sure.
Can you give me an example of an act that might challenge those ingrained power structures?
Sure, imagine a grassroots movement that emerges organically,
Okay.
outside of traditional political channels.
Mm-hmm.
It's driven by a shared sense of outrage and a desire for radical change.
Okay.
But it doesn't have a clear leader
Right.
or a predefined ideology.
Interesting.
It's more about a collective energy,
Okay.
a willingness to experiment with new forms of organization and decision-making.
So it's not about replacing one power structure with another. It's
Right.
about creating something entirely new?
Exactly. And the key is that this kind of movement would need to engage with the realm of jouissance.
Okay.
It would need to offer a different vision of what's possible, one that appeals to those deep-seated desires
Okay.
for connection, meaning, and a sense of belonging,
Mm-hmm.
but in a way that doesn't reinforce those old patterns of domination and exclusion.
Now that's what I call a revolution. It's not just about changing policies or leaders.
Right.
It's about transforming our very way of being in the world.
That's the power of Lacan's thinking.
Yeah.
It pushes us to look beyond those surface-level solutions
Mm-hmm.
and to consider the deeper psychological and symbolic structures
Right.
that shape our social and political realities.
And it sounds like it requires a pretty radical level of self-awareness.
It does.
Both individually and collectively?
Yeah, but it also offers a sense of hope.
Okay.
Because if we can start to understand those unconscious forces that shape our lives,
Right.
we can start to reclaim our agency and imagine new possibilities for ourselves and for the world.
I love that reclaiming our agency is like we're not just passive recipients of these societal forces.
Right.
We have the power to disrupt and transform them.
Precisely. And that brings us back to Safatle's central argument
Okay.
that true transformation requires a deep engagement with psychoanalysis, not just as a therapeutic tool,
Right.
but as a way of understanding the hidden mechanisms of power
Yeah.
and the potential for radical change that lies within each of us.
You've given us a lot to think about today.
It is a lot.
But I have one more question.
Oh.
If we buy into this Lacanian view of politics,
Yeah.
what does that mean for how we engage with the world? Are we supposed to abandon traditional forms of activism
Not at all.
and just wait for some unconscious act to magically change everything?
No voting, organizing, advocating for change.
Okay.
Those are all important ways to engage with the political process.
Right.
But what Lacan and Safatle are encouraging us to do is to approach those actions with a deeper level of awareness.
So it's not about abandoning those traditional forms of engagement.
Right.
It's about bringing a new level of consciousness to them.
Exactly. We can start by asking ourselves what unconscious desires might be driving my political beliefs. How is transference shaping my perceptions of leaders and institutions? What would it mean to engage in political action from a place of greater self-awareness
Yeah.
and a willingness to challenge those ingrained patterns?
That's a powerful challenge.
It is.
And it's one that I think we all need to take seriously if we
Yeah.
want to create real and lasting change.
It is, and I think that's what makes Safatle's work so relevant today. He's not offering easy answers or quick fixes.
Right.
He's challenging us to grapple with the complexities of power
Yeah.
and to consider how we can harness those unconscious forces for true transformation.
Well, I think you've definitely given our listener plenty to ponder.
It's a lot to think about.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love to hear any final thoughts you have about how we can actually apply these ideas to our own lives.
Right.
What's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from all of this?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Don't underestimate the power of the unconscious. It's a vast and often unexplored territory,
Right.
but it holds the key to understanding who we are, how we relate to the world, and how we can create real change.
So how do we start exploring that territory? It's not like there's a map.
That's where things get interesting.
Yeah.
We have to become more attentive to those moments when the unconscious breaks through
Right?
in our dreams,
Right.
our slips of the tongue, those seemingly irrational choices we make.
Yeah.
Those are the clues that can lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves.
It's like we're all carrying around these hidden reserves of creative energy,
You could say that.
these revolutionary impulses just waiting to be unleashed.
Yeah,
We just have to learn how to listen to those deeper voices within us.
exactly. And who knows what incredible transformations might emerge
Yeah.
when we start to tap into those forces.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listener plenty to chew on for now.
I think so.
Thank you for joining us on this fascinating deep dive into the world of psychoanalysis and politics.
It's my pleasure.
So much of what we've talked about today revolves around power, how it shapes us,
Right.
how we relate to it, and how it might be possible to transform it.
Yeah.
But what does that actually mean for us on a personal level? How can we apply these Lacanian ideas to our own lives?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Even if we're not revolutionaries or political activists.
Right. I think one of the most powerful things you can do is start paying attention to those moments
Oh,
when your unconscious desires kind of break through in everyday life.
okay.
Pay attention to your dreams,
Right.
those strange or recurring images that pop up.
Mm-hmm.
Notice those slips of the tongue,
Yeah.
those times when you say something you didn't quite mean to, and pay attention to your seemingly irrational choices.
Okay.
Those decisions you make that don't quite fit with your conscious logic.
So it's like those little glitches in the system.
Yeah.
Those moments when our carefully constructed personas slip a bit
Exactly.
that can offer us valuable insights.
Exactly. Those are glimpses into your unconscious, and they hold clues to those deeper desires and motivations
Right.
that are shaping your experience.
Okay.
And once you start to become aware of those unconscious forces,
Yeah.
you can begin to ask yourself some really important questions.
Like what kinds of questions?
Well, for example, think about a recent political event that sparked strong emotions in you.
Okay.
Maybe it was debate,
Mm-hmm.
a protest, a new policy announcement.
Okay.
Ask yourself, how might transference be influencing my perspective?
Okay.
Am I projecting my own hopes or fears onto the people involved?
Interesting.
What unconscious desires might be fueling my reaction?
That's a really interesting exercise. I think we often react to these events on a purely emotional level
Right.
without really stopping to examine what's driving those emotions.
Exactly. And by bringing those unconscious dynamics into conscious awareness, you can start to gain a more nuanced and critical perspective on your own beliefs and actions.
Right.
And that can be incredibly empowering
Mm-hmm.
because it allows you to make more conscious choices about how you want to engage with the world.
So it's not about trying to become completely rational or emotionless.
Right.
It's about understanding how those unconscious forces are shaping our experience so we can make more informed decisions.
Precisely. And that can have a ripple effect on the world around you.
Okay.
Because the more people who start to question those ingrained power dynamics
Right.
and those unconscious patterns of behavior, the greater the potential for real and lasting change.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
I see.
I feel like I've gained a whole new vocabulary for understanding myself and the world.
It's powerful stuff.
But before we sign off, I'd love to hear any final words of wisdom you have for our listener.
Sure.
Any parting advice on how to continue this journey of self-discovery and perhaps even spark a little revolution along the way.
I would simply say this. Stay curious, stay open to new perspectives,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to question everything. The world is far more complex and mysterious than we often realize.
Right.
And there's always more to learn, more to discover,
Yeah.
more to transform.
Beautifully said. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring Safatle's work.
Yeah,
Dive deeper into Lacan's ideas.
absolutely.
And most importantly, keep paying attention to those whispers from your unconscious.
It's all there.
You never know what revolutionary potential might be hidden within those depths.
Indeed, the revolution begins within.
Until next time, keep diving deep.